So the book we're talking about this month is this one, The Essence of Tibetan Buddhism. And it's available in digital form. So there's a link on the TNL website. And this is kind of an interesting book for a number of reasons, some of which are not obvious until you actually start looking through the book. But the origin of this book, which explains some of the style of it, which is the reason I'll talk about it a little bit. In fact, I'm going to be a little bit scholarly tonight. I'm going to put on my professor hat if nobody minds. Maybe that'd be a good idea because there's a lot of reflection up here. But it's a virtual hat, so it's not going to do any good. Anyway, Lama Yeshe and quite a number of Western students were gathered to hear a teaching by the Dalai Lama in Europe. I don't remember exactly where in Europe right now. And His Holiness got sick and couldn't do some teachings he anticipated doing. And so Lama Yeshe was on the spot, and His Holiness said, hey, how about you do it? You teach the class that I was going to teach. And Lama Yeshe makes some comments in the books about Yai. Okay, I'll do it. So it's very off the cuff. I had the opportunity to do a retreat with Lama Yeshe once. And I don't know to what extent he actually would take the time to think about the things he was going to talk about and prepare his talks. I have seen lamas do that. I remember Tara Tilke used to do that. He did a class on the Heart Sutra at Green Gulch Farm Zen Center. And he spent a lot of time preparing for it. And I thought that was kind of extraordinary because he probably had been reading it for 50 years and memorized it, been teaching it, gosh knows how many times. But he spent a lot of time preparing for it. But I think Lama Yeshe may not have had a chance to do that. So he was just speaking off the cuff. And the book itself does not even include a translation of the teaching that his talk was based on, which is what is usually called the three principles of the path, or the three principal aspects of the path, which is a 14 stanza text that was written by Tsongkhapa, and it's become very popular because it's so pithy. And basically, it's the entire Lamrim boiled down to 13 stanzas. And the 14th stanza is a statement that one should go off and practice, which really refers to the need to practice Tantra, but he's not entirely explicit about it in that respect. So, because the text is not in here, and it's actually the text that, not in the book, and it's actually the text that Lama Yeshe is working from, I went ahead and I made a translation available for everybody, and it's on the TNL calendar site for this course. You don't have to do that, Mary Camille, because I'm about to screen share and show you the text. Unless I screwed things up here, which it looks like I may have. No, guess what? I didn't. Okay, here it is. So here's the text. And it's divided essentially into 5 parts, if you want to think about it from that point of view. The first 2 stanzas are essentially about the Lama and the importance of the Lama. So I'm not going to talk about that because I've talked about Lamas a lot in the talks that I've been doing for Thubten Norbu Ling. And then there's the first aspect of the path, which is renunciation. And I'm going to talk about this a lot, which is actually quite unusual for me because as some of you know, I teach philosophy. currently at Portland State University, but I've done so at other places. And usually I start with the third aspect of the path for several reasons, not least of which is the word renunciation freaks Americans out. So I don't start there. But then there's the second aspect of the path, which is bodhicitta, or here, the wish to achieve enlightenment for every living being. And the third aspect of the path, which is the correct view, which is all about understanding the two truths and emptiness. And then there is practice, which is the 14th stanza. So that's those, if you will, those 5 sections. So, okay. Having done that, if I can see that I'm going to have a problem here. Just a moment. Let me go to my desktop. Or wait a minute, where is this? I have this problem over and over again. Hold on a minute. Ah, there we go. Don't save. Okay, goodbye. All right, there we go. There'll be not something else that I'll be showing you in screen sharing or screen sharing in a minute when we get to it. So anyway, this particular translation comes out of this book. Comes out of this book, which is called The Principal Teachings of Buddhism. And this is a wonderful little book. It is a commentary on the three principal aspects of the path. And it is translated by Geshe Lobsang Tarchin and Michael Roach. Now, what's interesting about this is that this Geshe is working from notes that were taken at a teaching given by Pabanka Rinpoche. And for those of you who've been sort of hanging around Thubten Norbuling for a while, or a little bit more familiar with Tibetan Buddhism, Pabanka Rinpoche was a very important teacher because he was the main teacher of His Holiness's 2 main tutors, Ling Rinpoche and Trijang Rinpoche. And in fact, Trijang Rinpoche was the main disciple of Pabanka. And we also have something that we're going to look at a little bit, is a translation of the 3 principal aspects of the path done by Trijang Rinpoche along with another translator. Because one of the things I want to do is I'm going to compare translations, because these geshes and supervising these translations are having the translators bring out some subtle points that are very relevant. Okay, so that's why I said I'm going to put on my translator's hat, or my scholar's hat. I don't do translation anymore. But that's not enough. We're going to look at a third translation and a lot of commentary on that. And that's from this book, Three Principal Aspects of the Path. And this is by Geshe Sonam Rinchen, who's one of the main teachers of the Tibetan Library, and his longtime translator, Ruth Sonam. And I like this book a whole lot because, for one thing, Geshe Sonam Rinchen was my main teacher of Madhyamaka philosophy. And when I read his commentary, it's like sitting in class with him. I recognize a lot of things about his style. But he goes into great detail about some very important points, which you don't find in this book or almost any place else. The other thing to observe for those of you who are particularly connected with Thubten Norbuling is that all of these geshes are Sera monastery geshes. Now that may not seem like all that relevant, But what we're looking at here is a Sera tradition, which is, I think, particularly relevant for students in FPMT, because Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopa are Sera trained monks. So essentially what we have here is a Sera monastery oral commentary on Tsongkhapa by some of the great lamas of our lifetime and just before our lifetime. So I mention all this because there are not a lot of us here, but I know there will be people who attend this class, as it were, by listening to the recording, and it may be of some interest to them. Okay, so that's sort of a little bit of context. Anyhow, it's something I find interesting. Maybe it's not of greatest interest to everybody else. Doesn't look like it's the greatest of interest to a number of other people here, because I can actually see you on this other computer that I'm looking at. But anyway, okay. So why is it that I decided I wanted to start out by focusing on renunciation? I mean, usually I don't. I usually start with teachings on emptiness and work backwards through bodhicitta and finally to renunciation. And that's because the idea of renunciation, whatever that means, is very unnerving to a lot of people. And it raises, for me, it raises a very interesting question. I mean, among the original audience of this teaching, which was to say monks and nuns indirectly, the idea of renunciation was a given. I mean, that's what it means to be a monk or a nun. It means to be a renouncer of ordinary life. But all of us, and probably most of the people who listen to the recording, are not monastics. We're lay people living in the world. Now, when you read some of the commentary about renunciation, I think it can make you a little uncomfortable. Certainly at one time in my life, it made me quite uncomfortable. And Lama Yeshe, being very attuned to Westerners, addresses this problem right off the bat in his teachings. And so that's where we're going to begin. But sort of a prologue or a context for that is asking a question of everybody who is a Buddhist practitioner, which is, what are we trying to do? What are we trying to do in our Buddhist practice? Are we really trying to become enlightened? Are we really trying to become liberated? And if we are really trying to be liberated from samsara, how much are we going to commit to the process of doing whatever we have to do to be liberated from samsara? Because obviously it's not an easy task. A lot would be asked for us. Or a lot would be asked, well, actually a lot is asked for us, but I was meant to say a lot is going to be asked of us. So, as I've said many times in the teachings that I've been doing for Thubten Norbuling, I want to teach out of my own experience as much as possible, given the limitations of my experience, of course. And in this particular case, one of the things I want to say is, I've been practicing as a Buddhist for many years. I mean, for most of my lifetime. And I can't say in actual honesty that I ever saw myself practicing for the sake of becoming liberated. And even though I've taken bodhisattva vows, in all honesty, it's really hard for me to say that I'm practicing for the benefit of all beings. Because deep down inside, there's a big thrust, which is I'm practicing for my own benefit. Well, what does that mean? Well, if I'm practicing for my own benefit, we know that my practice is going to be limited because the scope is going to be small. We know that from Buddhist philosophy. But when I'm honest with myself, I have to say that really the reason that I practice is that I can't stand spending all my time in ordinary reality. If I don't have an opportunity on a regular basis to spend some time in non-ordinary reality, I feel like my life really sucks, just to put it as bluntly as possible. I mean, the mornings that I meditate and nothing much happens, which is many mornings, I feel like this really is a drag, you know. But every once in a while, something really extraordinary happens in my practice, and I slip out of ordinary reality, and I feel like I can stand to be in this world now, because I at least have a little pinky or a toe or something in another world sometimes. And that's actually the reason why I practice. Now, from a Buddhist point of view, certainly from a Mahayana Buddhist point of view, and especially from a Vajrayana Buddhist point of view, that's not a very good reason for practice. But I'm not a monk. I mean, I thought about it at one point, but I'm not a monk. I'm a married guy. I like being married. You know, I live in the world. I have a stereo set and I love to listen to jazz. And when I cook, I listen to jazz, which is, by the way, very un-Zen. I lived in a Zen monastery, cooked in their kitchen, and everything was silent. That's not how I cook. I listen to jazz when I cook. Sometimes I dance when I'm listening to jazz and cooking, especially when I'm flipping blue corn pancakes. I really get into that, you know. So, you know, I like it. I like an aspect of the worldly life. I won't go into any details beyond that about, you know, just take it for granted. And actually, just about everybody I know who's a Buddhist practitioner is like that. I don't mean necessarily all the reason why they practice is because they want a pinky and non-ordinary reality. I don't know why other people practice. But they're worldly in a significant way. From the point of view of Tsongkhapa's teaching, that creates barriers. I'm looking for the right word. I don't want to say problems. I don't want to say things are hopeless from his point of view or from the point of view of Pabanka or Geshe Sonam Rinchen, although I think from his point of view, I must have seemed hopeless from my general worldliness. But for Westerners, figuring out how to negotiate these teachings, which are fairly explicit about the problems of worldliness, and yet living in the world is, I think, a core problem. And I don't know about a lot of people talking about it, frankly. So I am going to talk about it. And that's the reason I'm starting with the issue of the first aspect of the path, which is renunciation. Now, if we look into what it actually means, it's not quite as frightening a concept as it sounds. It's actually, in fact, a liberating concept, which is the whole point. But you have to get at what is intended is in Tsongkhapa's teaching, at least as far as I can figure out what's intended in Tsongkhapa's teaching. So to a great extent, I'm going to be looking at Geshe Sonam Rinchen's commentary to piece out what the actual meaning of renunciation is. And to sort of frame that, I'll say that someplace I read a translation, and I don't know where it is, lost track of it completely, but some very competent translator working some very competent Geshe said the first principal aspect of the path is giving up on the world. Now, giving up on the world and giving up the world, which is what we might think of as renunciation, are two really different things, right? Giving up the world somehow means, in our minds, going away from it, which, by the way, is not what renunciation means. And Lama Yeshe is going to talk about this. Although it does, I have to say, sound a bit like what Geshe Sonam Rinchen means. But we'll start with Lama Yeshe. Giving up on the world suggests something else. It suggests that somehow the world is not going to give us what we want, at least by my interpretation of that statement. And I think that is the starting place for understanding the meaning of what is being referenced by renunciation, is that the world isn't going to give us what we want. And if we really think about it, most of the time, it's questionable. Is the world going to give us what we want? Now, in my experience, a lot of times it does. I have good days that are so wonderful. I mean, just sort of gratitude and contentment would be the right words for what I'm experiencing. And on those days, I'm feeling like the world is giving me what I want. And it's not necessarily fancy stuff. In fact, it's almost never fancy stuff, right? I mean, it might be a really nice meal in a really nice restaurant. But if I'm honest about what it is that's going on, is I'm feeling good that day. And that's why the world is giving me what I want. It's not really the world that's giving me what I want. It's because I'm feeling good that day. And so everything I'm doing feels really good, but it's coming from inside me. However, it's hard to remember this because we're worldly people. And to make matters really difficult, it's not just that we're worldly people. It's that modern American society has programmed us very, very deeply to believe that stuff is essential to being happy. I mean, capitalism doesn't work unless the mass of humanity is programmed to consume stuff. Because the way capitalism works is stuff's got to get sold to you by the people who make stuff, who make a profit by making stuff, or owning the companies that make stuff, or having shares in the companies that make stuff, or et cetera, on down the line. So the whole system works on the basis of people being convinced that they got to have lots of stuff in order to be happy. Well, as Buddhists, we should know that that's baloney. And actually, if we analyze very closely what our experience is, it's obvious that it's not true. Just as I'm saying, when I'm feeling the world's giving me what I want, it's not because the world is giving me any stuff. It's because I'm having a good day for whatever reason. Of course, the problem is that I have at least as many bad days as good days. So why is that? Where do those good days come from and where those bad days come from? Well, I know one thing is, when my health is good and I've slept well, I'm predisposed to having a good day. And if I've only gotten a few hours of sleep, or if I'm sick, I'm having a bad day, no matter what I do. I mean, I could win the lottery on a day that I'm feeling sick and didn't get enough sleep, and I'm not sure how happy that would make me. I might still feel pretty crappy. At the same time as I'd probably be feeling pretty good, but part of me would be feeling pretty crappy nevertheless. Well, His Holiness has talked about this, ad nauseum also, so I'm sure you've heard this, and I don't have to go into it very much. But it gets, again, in a certain way, it gets at this question of renunciation, but it gets at the question of renunciation from the point of view of lay people. So what does this mean for us as lay people to recognize the truth that samsara is samsara, and there are always going to be problems for us? That there will be happiness, of course, and His Holiness says that's what all beings want. They want happiness. So it's achievable, he says. But nevertheless, to get free, at least according to Tsongkhapa, we have to do something. We have to let go of something about our relationship to the world. That's what's called renunciation. Now, let me get really specific about something that Lama Yeshe says, because it's so to the point. And I'm not going to be, I don't want to be abstract here. I want to be specific. He says, this is on page 17, if you want to try and find it at some point, second paragraph. So I want you to understand that renouncing sensory pleasure doesn't mean throwing nice things away. Even if you do, it doesn't mean you have renounced them. Renunciation is a totally inner experience. Renunciation of samsara does not mean you throw samsara away, because your body and your nose are samsara. What he means to say is that your body and your senses are samsara. You can't throw your body and your senses away. How can you throw your nose away? Your mind and body are samsara. Well, at least mine are. So I cannot throw them away. Therefore, renunciation means less craving. It means being more reasonable instead of putting too much psychological pressure on yourself and acting crazy. He must have thought all his students were crazy. I don't know how he put up with his students. Actually, I don't know how any of these lamas put up with us, quite frankly. I've actually wondered about that quite a lot. And they do. They put up with us a lot. They spend lots of time with us, give us lots of attention. Okay. What he's emphasizing here is unbalanced craving, extreme craving. Desires are there. He's saying, you know, you need to eat. I mean, he actually says that in the previous paragraph. You know, you need to eat. You have a stomach. You can't get rid of this. You have this need, right? But there are needs that are reasonable and balanced, and needs that are unreasonable and unbalanced. And engagement with unbalanced, unreasonable needs are the source of the problem. And that is what one lets go of. Okay. There is a term that we're going to run into called overestimation, and its compatriot, underestimation. Right. The problem is that our relationship with objects of the senses is an unbalanced relationship because we overestimate the characteristics of things in the world, of objects. They're inflated. That's why he says we're crazy, right? He often uses the word hallucinate, that we see things as being much more than what they actually are, as being capable of giving us much more than they're capable of giving us. And that this is the problem. And that what is to be renounced is the extremity of that relationship with objects, because it's the extremity that leads to extreme craving and grasping, and all the negativities or contaminations, to use the technical term, that follow from that. It's not the mere fact that we have desires. It's not the mere fact that I like to listen to jazz and I want to hear what the saxophone sounds like. So that means I'm investing a certain amount of money in a stereo set. Okay, fine. So I'm going to invest whatever, $400 or $500 in a stereo set with some reasonable speakers and buy some nice CDs. But what I've noticed is that pretty quickly I get the feeling that those speakers aren't good enough. They don't quite give me the sound I want to hear in Coltrane's saxophone. I know that that sound is just a little bit richer and more vibrant. Well, in order to hear that, I guess what I really need is $1,000 pair of speakers. And you see where this is going? Okay. Actually, I can hear Coltrane's saxophone perfectly well in my several $100 stereo set. But I'm convinced that if I spend $1,000, I'm going to really hear it a lot better. And there's this phenomenon among audiophiles. They know this, and I was an audiophile at one time, which is your ears get used to the speakers and the audio system that you have, and it starts sounding dull. And the only thing you can do about it is upgrade. So, people like Bose and whatnot that make stereos, they love this. They didn't create this problem. This is a human problem, but they know it's out there, right? So I fell prey to it for a while. My wife started making comments about the speakers that were proliferating around the house. And sort of that established a certain limit on what was going to happen. But there it was, This is what Tsongkhapa is talking about, right? It's not the basic thing, not the basic need. It's not the basic desire, right? It's the overestimation of what the object is likely to produce in the way of satisfaction, and missing the fact that the source of satisfaction is actually inside us. It's not in the object. Because I can enjoy John Coltrane on a $50, well, I don't know about a $50 speaker. But anyhow, I can enjoy Coltrane on a pretty budget-oriented speaker. I can, if I want to. This is really what Lama Yeshe is talking about. Renunciation is a totally inner experience. It doesn't mean throwing away your body and your nose or anything else in the world. It means less craving. And then he gets even more specific about what this means. Whoever is seeking liberation, now we're on page 18, or enlightenment needs renunciation of samsara. I think we all know what samsara is, to some degree anyway, but I'll come back more to what samsara is when I start getting into Geshe Sonam Rinchen's commentary. If you check your own life, your own daily experiences, you will see that you're caught up in small pleasures. We Buddhists consider such grasping to be a tremendous hang-up and not of much value. Well, you wouldn't think much of my listening to jazz while I'm cooking. That's a small pleasure. But I've got to disagree with him because I am not a monk. And of course, he would say I'm crazy. Now, he'd probably be right, but nevertheless, this is the life of a lay person. However, the Western way of thinking, quote, I should have the best, the biggest, quote, is similar to our Buddhist attitude that we should have the best, most lasting, perfect pleasure, rather than spending our lives fighting for the pleasure of a glass of wine. Now, of course, he's talking about a whole other kind of pleasure, isn't he? But he sees what most Westerners are looking for as fairly trivial. I suppose he's right. But on the other hand, we're not monastics, and we don't live like monks and nuns, right? I've known a number of people who felt like they wanted to be monastics, right? But what monastery is there to support Western monastics? Pretty limited. I lived Green Gulch Farm Zen Center for a year and a half. A lot of people came and went. They looked at the possibility of living a type of a monastic life in that Zen environment. It was a hard life, and it looked pretty good from the outside, but if you actually spent any time trying to live it, it was incredibly demanding. And people didn't have very much stuff. So a lot of people found it like, oh, this looks pretty good. And then they might come and they'd spend a little bit of time, like a month or a 3-month practice period. And no, I guess this isn't going to work, And why is that? Well, I mean, there are all kinds of personality issues and how to, I mean, everybody's different. Everybody had different reasons for why it didn't work. I had my reasons. So the question is, how, as lay people, how do we bring these teachings into our lives to find balance? That's what I really think is the deal. Okay, to find balance, to find a way, and it's a different way. It's not the way the monks and nuns live. It's a different way. We have to figure it out, each of us, on our own. And part of the way I think we figure it out is we learn about how our minds work so we can find that balance. And that's one of the reasons I'm going to turn to Sonam Rinpoche's commentary, because he actually analyzes the psychological process that renunciation liberates, actually cleans up the process, makes the process wholesome rather than unwholesome. That's what I was trying to say. There we go. Okay, last quotation from from Lama Yeshe. And remember, Lama Yeshe really understood Westerners, and this was an impromptu talk to Westerners. So he tailors his comments to what he knows is possible, as far as I can tell. Excuse me, I'm going to lose my voice tonight. I can see that. The opposite of renunciation of samsara, to put what I'm saying another way, is the extreme mind that we have most of the time. The grasping, craving mind that gives us an overestimated projection of objects, which has nothing to do with the reality of those objects. He goes on. The craving mind projects onto an object something that is beyond the relative level, which has nothing to do with that object, that hypnotizes us. That mind is hallucinating, deluded, and holding the wrong entity. And he goes on to say that it's not just about objects, it's not just about stuff. In the second to the last paragraph, he says, it's unhealthy to have overestimated expectations of each other. Because it's the same problem whether we're talking about overestimating the nature or characteristics of a thing or overestimating the nature or characteristics of objects, right? It's seeing them as having characteristics beyond what they have. Now, this is in the context of relative reality. I'm not talking about ultimate reality. I'm not talking about from the point of view of emptiness. Although, understanding the empty nature of phenomena is in fact the cure, ultimately, for the problem, which is why the third principal aspect of the path is understanding emptiness. But to really understand how emptiness works in relationship to renunciation and checking us out of samsara, we need to understand a lot of psychological functions. What is it that creates overestimation? And how do we literally see it? And therefore, how do we actually counter it? Okay, having said all of that, to get at the answer to that question, I'm going to turn to Geshe Sonam Rinpoche because he does detail it. And I'm just going to read things for just a moment. And then I'm afraid I'm going to have to say, I'm going to stop except to take some questions if there are questions, because I'm losing my voice and I just can't go on. I have some sort of a swelling on the side of my throat. I think I might be getting sick. I don't know. This has nothing to do with what happened last weekend. But it's just the way it is. Okay, in case you happen to get a copy of this really excellent commentary, he talks about the first principal aspect of the path as the wish for freedom. And by the way, something that I didn't mention, I've been using the title of three principal aspects of the path. One path, three aspects. In Trijang Rinpoche's commentary, or translation rather, he talks about three elements, but they're all aspects of the same thing, okay? Three principles of the path, three principal aspects of the path, three elements. There's one path with three aspects. And that's a very important point, because we can talk about renunciation, we can talk about bodhicitta, we can talk about the view of emptiness. And when we talk about them, they can seem like three different things. But the indication here with this language, and that's why I'm focusing on language a bit, the indication here with this language is that they're three aspects of the same thing. Now that's worth thinking about, right? I've talked about emptiness as the actual cure for the psychological problems or the psychological problem of overestimation, which is the reason we need renunciation, because we're nuts. We're overestimating the value of things, right? To get at one, you go through the other, and all three work together in this particular way. So I'm just going to read something very quickly, and I'm going to go back to one of the other stanzas, and then I'm going to call it quits for the evening. Genso Rinpoche on page 45, under the title, The Wish for Freedom, another way of talking about renunciation. As long as we have a contaminated body and mind, which result from actions underlain by the disturbing emotions, we are in cyclic existence. Disturbing emotions stimulate compulsive actions. Compulsive, that's the word, important word. Giving rise to rebirth with a contaminated body and mind. And by the way, if you don't happen to like the idea of being reborn in a new body, you can take rebirth to be that which happens to you every moment. Every moment you're reborn, right? And what happens to you in that moment is a result of past karma, which is your contaminated body and mind. Then he jumps on. Ignorance causes craving, which provokes action and leads to further rebirth of the same kind. And so the process continues interminably, life after life. The fetters of contaminated action and disturbing emotion keep us bound to the cycle of involuntary birth and death. What's bound? Our mental consciousness, which continues from one life to the next. At present, we lack control over our destiny because we are driven by these emotions whose dictates we obey. Such a total lack of freedom, in which we are governed by other forces that do nothing but harm us, is clearly a condition of suffering. So next week, I'm going to start with this passage, and I'm going to work through it in greater detail. But before we leave, there's something else I want to do. And this is, I'm going to do another screen share, if I can make this work. So hold on a minute. Let's see if I can make this work. I want to show you something else. Okay, let's hope that this works. Here we go. There we go. All right. So as I said, there are three different translations that I sometimes want to work from, and these are the three. This is the number one is the Geshe Lobsang Tarchen Michael Roach translation, which is based upon direct teachings from Pabankaba. I give up. I'm not going to get it out. Second is Geshe Sonam Rinchen, Ruth Sonam, and the third is Trijang Rinpoche and Michael Richards. And I want to look at this stanza, number 7. The first translation is Tarchin and Roach, etc. This is our condition, as Tsongkhapa understood it. Although he says, this is in the section on bodhicitta, this is about all of our mothers, which is to say all other sentient beings who in the past have been our mothers, because we've had infinite lives, therefore infinite relationships, therefore our relationship with infinite beings, everyone's been our mother. They, but I'll just say you and I, are swept along on four fierce river currents. And next week I'll talk about what those 4 currents are. Chained up tight in past deeds, hard to undo. We're victims of our karma, if you want to use that word, victims. Stuffed in a steel cage of grasping self, smothered in the pitch black ignorance. In a limitless round we're born, and in our births are tortured by 3 sufferings without break. That's the way Tsongkhapa conceives of ordinary human life. Kind of grim, but honestly not entirely inaccurate. Certainly it appears to be very true on my bad days. Okay, the other translations bring out things that are slightly different. All right, for example, the next translation by Gensel Rinchen, he's specific. Stuffed in a steel cage of grasping self in the first translation is ensnared in the iron meshes of conceptions of self. That's the problem, to be more specific, conception of self. First translation, smothered in the pitch black ignorance. Well, ignorance, of course, is the essential problem. I'll come back to ignorance if you don't know what that means a bit later. Second translation, beings are enshrouded in thick darkness of ignorance. Okay, it just sort of gets at something a little bit different. Okay, and then the third translation is, not a whole lot new in regards to that second 2 lines. Trapped in the iron mesh of self-grasping, smothered in the blackness of ignorance. But the second line, bound by the fetters of hard to stop actions, or bound by the tight bonds of actions which are hard to escape, or chained up tight in past deeds, hard to undo. Slightly different versions of all the same thing. Speaks to the way in which our karma drives us. Now, if you connect this 7th stanza with the first 7th stanza, we get at why we suffer from overestimation. The reason we suffer from overestimation, right, is that we're bound by the fetters of hard to stop actions, right? We desire things based upon old habits of what we believe they're going to do or what we're going to get, in spite of the fact that over and over again, we see that we don't get it, whatever it is. Okay, now how do I get rid of this? I'm screen sharing and I can't seem to make it stop. Hold on a minute. Oh, okay, up here. All right. Right. Someday I'll get it right all the time. It's karma, right? We have these habits. What is karma? Karma is circumstances that arise in the present which trigger seeds of habit patterns deep within us. And a situation in the present and a habit pattern deep within us come together and we act. Now, as Lama Yeshe said, we act compulsively is the problem. that we're not really paying all that close attention to what's going on. We grasp after the thing that we think is going to make us happy without considering what is the thing. We overestimate it. We grasp after it. We, as Lama Yeshe says, we hallucinate its ability to do something for us. Ultimately speaking, though, we know if we stop and pay attention that it's not the thing that's doing something for us. That what the happiness is that we're wanting arises within us, and it can arise within us irrespective of the best, biggest, etc. thing. It does not require that. This is what Lama Yeshe is saying when he's talking about balance and not craving too much, too intensively. Okay, look, I've just about lost my voice and the left side of my throat is throbbing. That's not a good sign. But if anybody has any questions about anything I've been ranting about for the last hour, I'll give it a shot. So feel free to ask if you have a question. Just unmute your mic. There's only a few of us here, and I'll do what I can. Otherwise, I'll say thanks for coming and good night. So where do we stand?
One quick question.
Sure, Louis.
The name of the book that you were just quoting from, the commentary that you were.
This one.
Yes, and who's it by again? There we go. Okay, thank you.
SONAMRINCHEN.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, the three principal aspects of the path. It's published by Snow Lion, I think around 1999, something like that. Highly recommend it. Anything else?
David, I wanted to see the cover of the first book you mentioned.
Was it this one? Is this the one you mean? The Principal Teachings of Buddhism?
Yeah, David, could you send that information to Venerable Dundrup and then maybe he can post it on the website?
Sure. Yeah, I can do that. No problem. There are others. There are other commentaries. I know that. These just happen to be the ones that I have. I know His Holiness has taught on the three principal aspects of the path many times, and you could probably find his teachings in his archive someplace. So that would be another place to go. In fact, my recollection is he's done it quite recently, but I can't remember when specifically, but I do remember he's done it quite recently. Okay, anything else? Are we good? Okay, well, thank you for coming. I'll be here next week, and it'd be nice to see you next week.